if you watched my 2025 language goals video, you might remember that this year I wanted to focus on no more than 2 languages. And specifically, I wanted to improve my Italian and work on my German. And now that the first quarter of the year is over, let's see if I was able to stick to these goals. In the beginning of January, I wasn't really doing much studying because my partner, my dog, and I were moving across the country. We moved from Arizona to New York City. And so the first couple of weeks of the new year was just us basically settling in the new apartment, getting all of our utilities, our Wi-Fi, just waiting for our boxes to arrive from Arizona. So language learning was definitely not something that I was really concerned with. However, little by little, I tried to go back to my normal routine. And even before our furniture had arrived, I already started taking my Babel Live classes for Italian, literally sitting on the floor and using box to prop my laptop. And then slowly I also started reading in Italian again. I started adding German, listening to things, going through some graded readers, doing a lot of vocabulary studying on Closemaster, and also some of my German textbook. However, that was January. And then in the beginning of February, I started feeling very reluctant when it comes to German. And at the same time, I was feeling more and more enthusiastic about Italian, which kind of surprised me because my Italian is significantly better than my German. And usually, typically, I get more excited about shiny new things rather than, things that I've had or have been working on for a while. However, this time it was not the case. And I think in a way, it also kind of makes sense because it is also true that the more I work on things, the more motivated I get to work more on them, if that makes sense. And I have been, if not focusing, then doing at least some Italian studies since pretty much April of last year. I took like 50 group classes, I think, last year. I read a bunch of books. I finished the year doing my 100 days of reading an Italian challenge. So I guess what I have been doing this whole time without really thinking much about it is building momentum. And here I basically had to choose whether I wanted to come up with some kind of a maybe bare minimum German routine, or maybe even double down on German to get that motivation again, or if I just wanted to lean into this enthusiasm that I had for Italian. And I think it took me a couple of weeks to finally be sort of confident in my decision, but I decided to go all in on Italian. And the reason for that is that in reality, for the last couple of years, I've been really wanting to be in the state of living and breathing one single language and hopping between all the different languages, especially beginner languages that I have started since 2020, made it really difficult. And so now that I finally was in a state where I would wake up thinking about Italian, I go to bed thinking about Italian. If I want to watch something, I want to watch something in Italian. If I want to read something or listen to something or anything like that, like all of the entertainment that I want to do, or most of it at least, is in Italian. So now that I finally reached that state, why would I stop myself and then somehow try to force German on myself? Like, it just didn't make a lot of sense. I don't know how long this will last, but I did decide to give Italian my undivided attention. And so far, I have been really happy about this decision. And I guess another thing I wanted to mention is that when I was thinking about potentially putting German aside for the time being, I kind of felt a little bad, or I had this feeling that somehow I was failing because I told myself that I would focus on Italian and German. And then I had to sort of watch my own video or read through my own notes to remind myself that what I actually wanted to do is focus on no more than 2 languages. Like, it didn't have to be 2. If I just want to drop a language, like if for some reason I get so much into German that I would be like, you know what, I just want to focus on German and nothing else, that is perfectly fine. So I kind of want to allow myself to focus on 1 language, 2 as a maximum, but not more than that. So yes, because of this decision, Italian is going to be the main language on which I'm going to report. As I've said said already, I did do some things for German, like finishing a couple of graded readers, doing a lot of close master, doing some textbook study. So I'm just going to put the resources that I have been using here on the screen somewhere, just in case anyone is interested. But at this point, January feels so far that I don't even remember all of the things that I was doing. And also now that I'm not really focusing on German, I feel like it doesn't really make a lot of sense to talk in detail about what I was doing for that language. So let's just focus on Italian for the time being. To do that, let's look at my 2025 goals for Italian. So one thing I wanted to continue working on is my active skills, so speaking and writing. And also grammar, because like I said in my previous videos, I do not think that my struggle to speak or write, which is, it's definitely getting better, but I don't think they had to do with just a lack of practice. It also had a lot to do with the lack of grammar knowledge, because I had never really studied Italian grammar explicitly and mostly relied on my knowledge of Spanish grammar, which helps a lot, but also does not cover everything there needs to be covered, unfortunately. If only things were that easy. These are the things I wanted to address, and here's what I have been doing. So the first thing is classes. I have taken 2 types of classes this year so far. So the first one is my Babel Life group classes. So those classes follow a curriculum, and usually you will get at least 1 grammar topic in each class. So those I consider to be both conversation practice. Obviously, it is somewhat limited because there can be up to 6 people in a group and you don't really get a lot of time to speak, but that also really depends on the class, the teacher, how many people actually signed up or showed up for the class. But what I'm trying to say is that I look at these classes both as grammar practice and conversation practice. This year, I finally started taking B1 level classes, and I have taken 19 of them, I think, out of 39, 40-ish, something like that. I have been taking a break from all kinds of classes for the last couple of weeks, but I am hoping to be back soon, partially because my subscription is running out and I need to make up for all the time that I haven't been taking classes. And then another type of classes that I was taking is just pure conversation, or maybe conversation and culture, if you will. So I found a tutor on italki, and I decided to schedule a trial class with her. I loved the trial class. I think it was a combination of me liking her as a teacher and as a person, but also the fact that finally my skills were at a level where I could just talk about things without necessarily, being too stressed. So the experience overall was great. I did go ahead and schedule more classes with that tutor, and I think we've had about 5 or 6 classes so far. A couple of days before the class, my tutor will send me 2 articles. I choose one of those articles. Usually they have to do with Italy, with like Italian culture, politics, gender issues, just like different social issues. And I will choose one that I think is the most interesting, or sometimes it's like just an article that is easier for me to talk about or anything like that. And then I let her know which one I chose, and during the class we talk about the topic. And there were 2 things. On the one hand, I actually really like this format because it allows you to get some input on the topic before you have to like produce your own sentences. So you get exposed to some vocabulary, you get exposed to just sort of like background information on the topic, which always helps. On the other hand, I did feel like some of the topics were like quite challenging for me to talk about, because I would have to both think about what I want to say. Like if we were talking about something like, let's say, the pay gap between, like men and women in Italy. And if she asked me something like, oh, what do you think can be done about this? So this way I would have to think about what can be done about this and then how to say that in Italian. That is definitely a bit challenging for me, but I think challenging is good. So in terms of grammar, I decided that the best thing for me at this point would be pretty much to go back to the very basics, as much as it hurts my confidence, because being able to read and understand some pretty advanced things, going back to like A1, A2 level grammar does hurt a little bit, but I decided to do it, and I think it also has been a very good decision, because that has made a lot of difference in my speaking, in my writing, and just like in in the confidence that I do speaking and writing with, if that makes sense. And yeah, so I'm going through this book currently. I'm about halfway done with it. I'm really hoping to get into the B1/B2 book, because there I will most likely see stuff that I have not, like acquired or like internalized yet. Whereas in this book, a lot of the things I already have known and have been using, but it definitely has helped. And once I'm done with this book, I'm planning to continue with the B1, B2 grammar textbook that I got. But in addition to that, I also got a B1, B2 just like general textbook, because I realized that when it comes to vocabulary, there's sort of a lot of different little things that I do understand when I read, like conjunctions and things like that, but I'm not super confident using them in my own speech or writing. And so I decided to try also not just a grammar textbook, but kind of like a general textbook, and to do them together and see how that works for me. So do I feel like my active skills have actually improved? I would say the answer is yes. I do feel a lot more confident both speaking and writing. So when it comes to speaking, the one thing that I have noticed is that I started speaking Italian to myself kind of organically without making myself do so. And to me, that is a sign that I'm getting to a level where it just feels like a lot more natural than it used to. So another thing I feel like I've been able to make some progress with is writing. Again, just because it feels a lot easier. It's something that I'm scared to do, because every time I think I would struggle a lot more than I actually do when I sit down to write. However, writing is not something that I've been doing consistently, and moving forward, I would like to find a way to do it, if not every day, then at least a couple of times a week. I don't know if that will be something like maybe writing essays, or just in general short texts like book reviews, for example, or movie reviews, or just journaling. We'll see, but writing is definitely something that I want to emphasize a little more in my study routine going forward. And now let's move to my favorite part, which is immersion. So if you have been watching this channel for a while, you will probably know that among immersion activities, reading is easily my favorite thing to do. And I think in the first 3 months of 2025, it also has been the thing that I have spent the most time on. So I think in the first 3 months of 2025, I finished 9 books. And I think there were a couple more books that I hadn't finished by the time Q1 was over, but I have finished them since. I didn't have a hard reading goal for Italian, but in general, I wanted to read around 9 books in all of 2025. So I think the fact that I have reached that number in the first quarter of the year means that things have been going great so far. And they really have been. To make it a little more fun for myself, something that I did in, I think, late January is create a reading bingo for Italian specifically for myself. And I am slowly but surely working on the prompts from the bingo board. But not only them, I also read things that I know would not match any of the prompts. And another thing that has been great about reading is that a lot of my media consumption in general, be it podcasts or YouTube videos, is also in one way or another tied to books or literature or the publishing industry and things like that. So for example, if I watch something on YouTube, it can be interviews with authors, it can be book reviews, book hauls, and things like that. A lot of podcasts I listen to also have to do either with Italian literature in general, or things that I see very close to literature, like history or philosophy, for example, because a lot of the times, especially when it comes to history, especially when it comes to the 1900s history of Italy, this kind of stuff helps me a lot when it comes to understanding the literature that I read and sort of the context, the historical, socio-political, economical context in which those works were written. Same for Substack posts. And by the way, I've become really addicted to Substack because I'm trying to cut back on all the other social media, including YouTube, which is my #1 addiction. But I feel like whenever I take something out of my sort of social media / scrolling menu, there's always another thing that somehow manages to, compensate for the time that I can no longer spend on, say, Instagram or Twitter or anything like that. that. And right now it is Substack. So I've been also finding a lot of great newsletters on Substack in Italian. And what I really like is that all of these things kind of feed into each other. Like one thing leads to another, because the more things I watch, read, or listen to, the more ideas I get from those things on what to watch, read, or listen to next. I don't want to sound like a crazy person, but I can show you like my map of Italian connections, where it's basically different people. A lot of them, most of them, I think, are authors, and then different connections between them, like kind of were they friends, were they lovers, were they spouses, and then also like different work that they have produced and how these things also talk to each other. It has been such a great journey so far, and what I'm really enjoying is that it is not so much about language learning per se, like getting better at Italian. It is also just something that I'm interested in as a person. Like I would probably do these things in English. I would do them in my native language. And I really enjoy being at this level where I can shift the focus from worrying a lot about not understanding something, or like being limited when it comes to what kind of content I can watch or listen to or read, to pretty much finding like whatever content I'm interested in and spending time with it. And then when it comes to my other languages, one of you asked me before if the fact that I wanted to focus on German and Italian this year means that I would not be doing anything in my other languages. And the answer is no. I definitely, especially with Spanish, I have some books, I have some shows, I have some podcasts that I do want to get to. It's just that they're not a priority right now. However, for this year, I did find a new author, the Argentine writer Silvia Monloy. And I read 2 of her books. To be fair, they were really, really short books. I think both were under 100 pages, but I think that's exactly what I needed to have some contact with Spanish or any other language I'm not focusing on right now without dedicating too much time and getting too distracted from Italian. And I want to say this one thing. I normally don't really talk about English all that much. And even when I make my language learning goals or whatever, or back when I was tracking my study time, I never counted English. And that is partially because I don't see English as my target language anymore, which is not to say that there's nothing else for me to learn or that my English is perfect, but it's just kind of like I'm not interested in actively improving it. However, just because I am not, sitting down with English textbooks doesn't mean that I'm not doing things to improve my English. And I think it is kind of wrong for me to not take that into account. For example, I told you that I have decided to put German on the back burner to be able to dedicate more time to Italian. But in reality, the language that probably like any language that I want to learn actually really is competing with is English. That is the language that I spend the most time on when it comes to reading things, listening to things, watching YouTube, even with time tracking, right? Like I said, I wouldn't track any time that I spent on, let's say, consuming content in English, but if I did, it would probably be a lot more than for any other language. And so it's kind of a weird thing, right? Because I'm saying like, oh, I'm not doing anything to actively improve my English, but all those hundreds of hours potentially of consuming content, right? If not thousands at this point, they're adding up and they are causing my English to be the way it is right now. And if I'm not doing that same thing for like other languages, then it kind of makes sense that I don't have the same results. Basically, I don't even know what I'm trying to say. I guess I'm trying to say that I should probably be more mindful about how much time I spend on English. And if I want to get my other languages to a similar level, then maybe I should be spending less time on English and more time on those languages. But also at the same time, like I don't really care that much. And if anything, English is probably the most important language for me because, again, living in an English-speaking country, working in English, like, it is important. All of this is to say that I have read, I think, 3-4 books in English this year. One of them was translated from French, which is not ideal because I'm not a rereader, and that means that if I ever start studying French, that is like -1 book that I can potentially read. But knowing what I know about French literature or literature written in French, there's still going to be a lot of things. So one book does not really make a difference. So this is how I've been doing in terms of language learning. I think what I really like about, being at the level that I am in Italian is that a lot of the times, instead of just thinking about it as language learning the language, I think about it as something that just makes me a better person in all the ways that I want to be better, like a little bit more disciplined. If I set certain goals like being better at speaking or writing, that I need to schedule those, practice sessions, and that helps me, like I said, to be a little more disciplined, to be a little more social, because I take group classes and it's a new tutor almost every time, and then I also take one-on-one classes, and it is a challenge for me as a socially anxious person, but the more I do it, the less anxious I feel. And then in terms of just reading books, that's an activity that I want to be doing more. I want to be away from screens for longer than I usually am, and I want to be reading more. And the fact that I'm discovering Italian literature while reading one thing leads to wanting to read a lot more things. All of that is contributing to the fact that I'm doing things that I actually want to be doing. So yeah, I would say it's been going really well. I am a little worried about jinxing myself because it has happened to me before. I sort of make a video about something, telling you how great something is going for me, and then my brain kind of just puts like a check mark on it and says, okay, we're done with this chapter, none of that anymore, please. So hopefully that doesn't happen, but if it does, well, it is what it is, I guess. Do let me know how your first quarter of 2025 was, and as always, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in my next video.